Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the fireside chat hosted by the Worcester Education Collaborative and the Worcester Public Schools. We are eager to get into our conversation today between Dr. Shawn Ginwright, Jerome Murphy Professor of Practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Professor Barry Maloney, President Barry Maloney, who will be serving as our facilitator today. Also joining us is our hometown heroine, Raquel Castro-Corazzini, with the city's Division of Youth Opportunity, and our extraordinary Superintendent of Schools, Rachel Monárrez. I'd like to offer special thanks and recognition to the Essler Family Foundation, who is supporting this event today and is a big supporter of education in our community. Shawn Ginwright is the Jerome T. Murphy Professor of Practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, but his contributions extend well beyond his academic work. He's a seasoned nonprofit leader, serving as the co-founder and chief executive officer of Flourish Agenda, a pioneering research lab and consulting firm dedicated to unlocking the power of healing and empowering youth of color as well as their adult allies to drive transformative change in both their schools and their community. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Barry Maloney.
Thank you, Jenny. Good afternoon. Let me please start off and never forget to thank our friends and colleagues at the Worcester Educational Collaborative for helping to also coordinate today's program. Jen Carey and the team there do amazing work every day on behalf of our young people in our community. And certainly we are very appreciative. I am very appreciative of the relationship that the organization has with Worcester State. So thank you very much. I also would point out that Raquel is a proud WSU alum. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, but we are really excited. I am really excited to introduce to you Dr. Ginwright. I had the chance to get to read The Four Pivots over the last few weeks and found it to be a fascinating read. And I think today's conversation, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, I think will motivate you to read the book. If you have read the book, I think it hopefully will help you connect some of the dots. There were definitely passages in the book that I had to reread, and Shawn and I talked about this before we got going, especially the mirror work. So I really want to virtually welcome Shawn to Worcester. I explained earlier that we'd love to have him come out physically to Worcester and take him to a ball game, take him to Wormtown, show him around the community, and help him get to know our community better and our community leaders. But welcome today, and thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, glad to have you. So Shawn, let me throw it to you to kind of kick off the conversation this afternoon. Broadly, the Four Pivots appears to be a labor of love that you've put a lot of work into. And as we talked earlier about, you take I would say a significantly different approach to how we can imagine social justice and how we can impact change in our communities. And I think one of the basic premises that you have in the book is that we must heal ourselves first to see any substantive change. And so I'm going to throw it to you to talk
Sure.
in an opening way about the book and the pivots, and congratulations on your work.
Well, thanks so much, Barry, and thanks to Worcester Education Collaborative, Worcester Public Schools. And I just need to make sure that I'm pronouncing Worcester in the right way. I have a friend that has corrected me several times, and so hopefully I'm not butchering the New England pronunciation of Worcestershire. So no, it's really an honor to be here and to share these ideas. I've been working in systems change work for all of my career, particularly systems where young people of color find themselves in school systems, juvenile justice systems, and have come to realize that in many ways, the systems that young people find themselves in can't change without the people in those systems changing. There's a way in which we think about systems change as a sort of that systems in and of themselves are entities that are alive, right? That systems are sort of these sort of external entities where we work, where we earn living. But I've come to sort of think about systems in a different way, that systems are essentially people that have sets of relationships that have come together for a common cause. And when we talk about systems change, there's two ways that I've come to sort of think about change. One way to think about change is sort of the external perfunctory way that we think about systems change. If we change policies, we change procedures, we change practices, guess what? We can get equity, we can get more efficiency, we can get better systems if we change policy practices or policies practices in those systems, that we can produce something. And that is never the case in my experience. That the change that we create, you could change the policy, you could change even the practice, you could change the procedure, but that doesn't change fundamentally the people in those systems. And that is actually what matters. That the changing of people, the transformation of human beings that find themselves in systems, lends themselves to transformation in the policy, the practice, and the procedure. But it doesn't work, Barry, the other way around. That is, you can't change the policy, practice, or procedure that transforms a human being in that system. It doesn't work that way. But if you change and work with the people, the passions, the hopes, the fears, the insecurities, the toxic relationships, if you heal those, then you actually create the conditions then for profound transformative policy practices and procedures. But how do you do that? Like, how do you then create those conditions? And, I haven't said this a lot in public, but, I'm in a school of education at Harvard, and I've been thinking about some of the challenges in schools and school districts and some of the shifts in those systems that we need to think about. And much of the way we think about schools as a system focuses almost entirely on the outcomes of schools, the academic achievement, the quality of education, the curriculum, all those things are important, but they're outcomes. And we don't think as much about creating the conditions that produce those outcomes. And my belief is if you focus on the conditions, the outcomes that we want to create are inevitable. But if we only focus on the outcomes and we don't focus on the conditions that produce those outcomes, we'll continue to sort of create, we're sort of on the hamster wheel of change, right? So this book was really trying to call attention to, then how do we think about deep, more transformative change in our society and in our systems? And I know in all my work, it's been about the places where I have learned the most is where I've failed, or I have, I have failed or have, had experienced challenges, right? And so these 4 pivots are an invitation to those leaders and systems that really take seriously or want to take seriously how to move in deeper, more powerful forms of change rather than surface levels of change. And so I tried to sort of write this book not from the theories that I've gotten from graduate school, but that are located in my own life, man. Like, there are places like, Barry, these things that I share with you, and this was largely because of my wife and my friend that said, don't write another education book, nobody's going to read it, right? They literally said that, right? Several times I gave them several drafts of chapters, and they said, don't write that, nobody's going to read it. And so they pushed me to really locate these lessons in my life, because these are the lessons that I've learned that matter in terms of my own leadership. And while they feel unconventional, I can attest to their impact on deep change. One of the things I haven't done is provided a lot of examples of systems and communities that I've worked with that have struggled and grappled with these pivots, and over time, what that has produced in terms of their change. And hopefully, if I have some time today, I could share some examples with both school districts, and community organizations, and even cities that are using these ideas and investing in these ideas, and we're beginning to see new types of outcomes. And so I call them pivots, Barry, because if I call them a change is hard. The 4 changes. Nobody wants to, like, if I say change your diet or change your, exercise, change requires a heavy lift. But a pivot is a subtle change. It's a subtle shift that if you just change this a little bit over time, that direction, you'll find yourself in an entirely different place if you just make a subtle shift, right? A subtle pivot from what you're already doing to another place. And it doesn't mean that you disregard everything you know about leadership. It doesn't mean you disregard everything you know about how you lead a school or a school district. It means that you just pivot slightly so that you find your leadership in a different direction over time. And these pivots are not sort of silver bullets. Some people say we should use the pivots to change our systems. They are practices. And a practice means that if you're committed to a practice, if you're committed to losing weight, if you're committed to changing your diet, it means that sometimes you're going to do really well, sometimes you're not. But if you're committed, you're going to do it again and again, and over time you get really good at it. And so this is the invitation to pivot in 4 different ways. And the first way that I call a pivot is a pivot in from lens to mirror, right? In our awareness, from lens to mirror. And I call that a pivot from lens to mirror because my own training, I thought that you can change systems by the complexity and the analysis of understanding the system. So I could explain why Black and brown kids were expelled from school at a higher rate than white kids. And I could talk about all of the reasons why there is inequality in schools and learning.
Folks, if we could keep our screens muted, thank you.
What I couldn't do well is my own reflection about that condition, about visiting young people's homes where there were 3 families living in, and my own reflection of that. I couldn't reflect on my own upbringing and how my own working class parents struggled to get me through school. So reflection, deep reflection, simply wasn't a part of my academic training, but I know that for my own leadership, that my capacity to reflect on my own insecurities, Barry, my own challenges as a father, as a husband, right? My own challenges raising my own kids gave me the honesty to actually lead in a different way. And I wish, and I can continue on, but I want to make sure I get to some questions. But I do want to say, raising my own, I've worked in youth development my entire life. But it wasn't until I had teenage children that I actually had to practice what I preached, right? In terms of adolescent development. And I should say that it was tough. My kids are older now, but those challenges that I experienced in my reflection, my deep reflection, helped me to think differently about my leadership and what schools and systems needs. The second pivot is a pivot from what I'm calling sort of these transactional relationships to transformative relationships. And if systems are sets of relationships, then how are we attending to the quality of those relationships? How do we do that? Most of our systems, we assume that if you get a paycheck, you're paid to do your job well. Doesn't matter. You don't have to like me. You don't have to trust me. But if I pay you to do a job, you know, in a systems way of thinking, your job is it's an exchange. And the environment oftentimes reinforces that in our relationships. I am the superintendent, you are the principal. I am the director, you are the employee. I am the teacher, you are the parent. These roles are sometimes predefined in systems as transactional. But we know in research, and you know in your own personal engagement, your own personal leadership, that relationships are everything. And that the shift from a transactional to a transformative relationship simply means that we have to cultivate opportunities, spaces, and conditions.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Shawn appears to be frozen at the oh, there he is. He's back.
Am I back?
He's back.
Man, I have changed my internet provider many times. Are we okay?
We're good. We're good, Shawn. Thank you.
Okay. I forgot what I was saying was transformative relationships are relationships that are a function of our humanity, where we allow our humanity to spill out on each other in the workspace and setting. And transformative relationships are important because they cultivate empathy, they cultivate trust, they cultivate care. These are the things that actually make systems vibrant and healthy, not just the transactional way that we go about them. But transformative relationships are so scary sometimes because our systems and our organizations sometimes aren't set up to cultivate transformative relationships. After all, how do we cultivate transformative relationships if we only have 2 hours a month to do that, right? Hopefully, over time in systems and in work settings. The third pivot is a pivot from problem to possibility, right? That as a sociologist, I was trained only to see the problem and challenges in schools and in systems, but not the assets that young people and families bring. Travian Shorter has a beautiful, and I think in a really important way to think about it. He calls it asset framing. And asset framing is a way to see the assets in communities rather than the brokenness. And I know that I was trained to just identify the challenges. But we also have to think about possibility even in ourselves. Oftentimes, when we're so focused on problem solving in our systems that we kind of submit to the condition that our jobs are to really play consistent and persistent whack-a-mole, right? It's always putting out fires. And am I still there, Barry? Am I
Yeah,
cutting off?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. And so when we're only putting out fires and we're only focusing on solving problems, we're not able to shift our gaze to the possibility that we want to create. Conditions that are right before us and keep our eyes fixed on something that may not yet even exist. That's difficult, Barry, but that's really important in justice-centered and healing-centered leadership. And part of the challenge of oppression is that it requires us to pay attention to it. And by paying attention to inequality and oppression and these issues, while important and urgent, it shifts our gaze and our focus from thinking about an entirely different possibility. And so possibility is cultivating our capacity to imagine something different, cultivating our capacity to dream and imagine. To have a vision beyond the present day is perhaps the most irresistible feature of leadership that leads people into a possible future. The fourth pivot is this pivot from hustle to flow. And I know a lot of folks resonate with that pivot. And they resonate with it because in this capitalist society and culture, we're rewarded for all that we can do, right? And all that we can produce. But we also know that this culture doesn't sort of value our capacity to slow down, set more realistic timelines, and to rest. And so these features of systems I've found have been really critical in having deep change rather than sort of quick, what I'm calling insta change, right? Insta transformation. These things are more durable and last and sort of the ingredients in systems that really have a durable impact and the capacity to transform them in ways that are important. So I'll stop there.
Shawn, thank you. And let me do some quick housekeeping that I should have done at the very beginning. To the folks who are joining us this afternoon, please feel free to put into either the chat or the Google Doc a question that you have. I know a couple of folks have put questions in already, and we will certainly get to those questions. This has also been framed today as a fireside chat. Just imagine the fire. It's going, the embers are burning. And we have two colleagues here who I wanted to turn, but first back to Shawn for a second, then I'll go to the superintendent and Raquel. As I mentioned to you before we got on the call this afternoon, Shawn, the chapters that I had to reread the most were that awareness chapter, and I think that as I was reading, I think it wasn't that I couldn't understand where the points you were trying to make. It was like, how do you fit this into your life? How do you fit this self-awareness? I know that at the end of chapter 1, you've got a list of questions that you suggest, not only that we kind of do some self-examination on a regular basis. I won't prescribe what regular means. And you also suggest that we get together with a group of, mentors or close friends and allies, that, ethics buddies, as we might sometimes recall them, who you can bounce these questions off and get a lot of feedback. But how do you recommend, how do you suggest organizations do this self-awareness? And again, starting with the individual themselves, but we get caught up in some of the other points that you make about how we don't have time to carve out these pieces. And that's, again, where I got stuck.
Yeah. Well, mirror work has to occur simultaneously at 3 levels in a system. One, like what are the questions we're asking ourselves? What are my own insecurities? What do I need to heal from? How did I experience this as a young person? Whatever those questions are, right? Just one really easy practice, and I don't know if this one is in the book, but before you go to bed, try to take an inventory of your day and try to identify just the various emotions you experienced. If they're positive emotions, put a plus. If they're negative emotions, put a minus. And at the end of the week, tally that up and try to have some assessment and reflection over your emotional map for the week. If you have a lot of negative emotions, that tells you something. You can sort of reflect on, this was a tough week because I was in a lot of negative, right? But it's just a tool for us to not continue to push forward without sinking into our experiencing of work in the world. At our relational level, it's the same. I recommend being in groups, and the groups are the most important way to practice mirror work. Because I use a mirror intentionally because a mirror don't lie, right? A mirror is going to reflect back at the truth. And so that group of people that you're having should be able to reflect the truth back to you, right? I don't feel like you're being authentic right now, Barry. Barry, I feel like you're trying to hide. Or Barry, last week you said this, and then you said to hold you accountable. Like the mirror group, that work allows you to actually practice greater accountability because you're in cultivating those transformative relationships, but you're using mirror work to accomplish it. But then the last is at the institutional level. Who are we as a district? Who are we as a school? Who are we as a community? How do you know that? Who is asking that question? And what evidence how are you gathering good evidence to actually ask that question? Do you ask young people their experience of schools? Do you have a survey every year of parents and their experience of being in the school? Like, you may already be doing some of this, but the question then is how are you using mirror work? And what is the mirror for your school district? And what does it say about you? And how do you actually make some decisions about that? And so those are some ways, and mirror work is harder because it implicates you. It doesn't always it doesn't mean that we actually go change the thing outside of ourselves. It means that I have to sit with some things that first before I can actually be effective as a leader.
Yeah, the theme of humility is also a big part of your book, and I just want to point that out. Let me turn to, if I may, to our panelists and ask Rachel and Raquel your thoughts on the lens to mirror section of the book. I'll start with Raquel. How about we start with Raquel in terms of how you
Yeah, I'm chomping on the bits here. Just a lot of, again, thank you for being here and really privileged to be able to have this conversation with you. Something that you mentioned in your book that stood out to me was how much in our daily work we are asked to analyze. And so thinking about our social conditioning and what happens, and I think so much about working in government and being around folks that are responsible for maintaining a system, that city system, plumbing, streets, this is like maintenance work. And then you work with the human service end of things, and you feel the tension between improvement work and maintenance work, and the frames that come with when that's your daily. And so when you mention the idea of how often we spend in an analysis and not in a reflection, and then if you want to move to reflection, people think your time is being almost like it's a luxury to think that you can get there. And I guess my comment is a little bit around how do we have these conversations, or in the spaces that I'm having the conversations about, this is an investment. Like, caring about each other is an investment. Doing the longer road to listening and sitting with each other is an investment. Less conflict will happen. More alignment will happen. Less tension. People will be happier. What have you seen in your work as you have that conversation about analysis versus reflection?
Yeah, great question. Analysis is half of the equation. We need to think right, but the capacity for deeper reflection requires trust. And so you're right, it is an investment, right? And it's not so much that, what I've seen is either you're going to pay for it later or you're going to pay for it up front. In other words, if you are only focusing on the externalities of a project or a group coming together, here's what will happen. Conflict will happen, disagreement will happen, confusion will happen, because I don't understand the terms that you're using, because we've been working in silos and we've never talked across our departments. So that will happen, frustration will happen, and then the effort will just be surfacey. But if you focus, so you pay for it, or it'll fall apart, or just fall apart, or the other way is if you invest in that relationships and you invest in the time up front, it's not that conflict will happen, but people will have greater tools to deal with them when they do. And because now we're riding together and we're on a journey together, and a journey has bumps in the roads. A journey will have, all kind of things that happen, but because we're on the journey together, because I have greater trust for you, because I have greater empathy for you, because you shared your story with me, now we could actually begin to use different language to actually solve the challenges that we have before us and actually see a possible future. But you pay for it up front or you pay for it later. Either way, this process of knowing each other, cultivating trust will show itself either way, right? It's just, how do you want to create it? And oftentimes it's an afterthought and it's done in a surface way. And then the effort just doesn't have the deep impact that was intended.
And you pay more for it later, right? because
pay-
you find yourself redoing the effort and redoing the effort, and you don't realize that this was way more costly because we didn't put up the upfront work. Yes, absolutely.
That's right. That's right.
Rachel, some thoughts?
Many, many thoughts swirling around in my head. Just to kind of add to what was just said, not only do you pay for it later, but it sets you back, you know, very far back. I mean, to the relationships become even more transactional. People hunker down more into their safe space, and they are less willing to think about any type of possibility that could be, because there has not been the necessary development of relationships and the reflective practices that are so crucial to healing, to growing together, to, I like the phrase you used, spilling our humanity on each other. You know, that's just so incredibly important. When I think about the work in Worcester Public Schools and what's been happening even in the last 2 years, we have been very much at this policy level, right? Like system structures, policies, because they're tangible, because people are hungry for something tangible, but then at the same time trying to start to simultaneously build the kind of relationships and the type of reflection and the value of every voice at the table and that sense of belonging that we know is so important. And I'm curious on your thoughts, Dr. Ginwright, about that I think that tension of balancing the starvation that I personally felt coming in by so many, and knowing that it's all based off of things that we can't even see. It's in the text you talk a lot about the iceberg, right, and truly the mindset down below that we don't see in the iceberg, and so how leaders can do that as you're pulling people along. Yeah, I'm curious on that and where you've even
I think the tension you outline is real. I think of that tension between sort of the urgency of policy change, the urgency that the current policies are actually hurting, harming, toxic, right? And the urgency to get that done, as well as the need to do it in a way that is transformative. That's a tension, right? And oftentimes the urgency of changing the thing outweighs the messiness and the long-term impact on doing it in a deeper transformative way. And I think they're not mutually exclusive. Right. I think that there are things in equity, things around equity that can be sort of addressed and changed, but I would not be satisfied with them if they were done in a way that was urgent, right? Like you can still you can walk and chew gum at the same time, but in order to actually reimagine the policy, in order to actually not just changing it from harm to not harm, right? That's sort of the sort of, changing it from harm to not harm is just sort of kind of responding. But to have the deeper level of thinking about why the policy exists in the first place, what are the things that we could actually do, the policies that can actually advance a vision rather than just get rid of the ones that are barriers to the vision, right? Those are deeper kinds of questions and only come about through emergent conversations with people you trust, with people who are on a journey together. And so those investments of time and resources may at first feel like not like you're ticking off the to-do list, right? But over time, those things actually have a much more profound impact. And I have, a few examples I'd love to share at some point where communities and schools have just taken that time, and what's come out of that would not have been possible. The policies, the practices would not be possible had that group not gone through the deeper sort of journey together.
Mhm.
And I think a lot about that, when you talk about systems or people, like the people have trauma that they're showing up to work with, that they, when they're in their place of, I'm not thinking, they perpetuate the same trauma that perhaps was perpetuated in them. And we lean into what we know, even if it was harmful to us. And so recognizing that your workforce, that your community, that the folks around you are showing up to the conversation with the story that you can't see, right? You can't see what happened. You can't see where they picked that behavior up. You don't know what they've been through. And people, for me, community folks have a story that they're screaming to tell because they've walked so long being invisible in their communities. And so, that's when you see like organizers that really care about the work, people that really care, unintentionally stepping all over everyone's toes in their action of love. Like they're really trying, but if you haven't done the healing work and you haven't had the space, because healing work is privileged, that comes with lots of resources invested into healing. And so the idea that you are working with people that are, caring, but not have some stuff that is, underneath the water, and not preparing the structures of how we're going to be with each other with that in consideration. You like prepare for the trauma to show up. You can do so much more work if you're just preparing for that to be something that you're going to have to work through.
I so much appreciate you bringing that up, Raquel, because it's so common to want to do good work, but not account for the trauma that people bring into the work, the good work that you're trying to do, right? You've seen it, I've seen it. You're in a community meeting and somebody says something and someone else I've seen it in meetings, I've seen it in community meetings, I've seen it in professional meetings, right? Just last week at a conference, right? I've seen it, right? And you're so right. It's that we're unaware, or we don't have the tools. Like when you see trauma show up, you take it as, if without the tools, you take it as an affront on your own stuff. You take it as disrespect. You take it at you respond to it as if it were not trauma. You respond to it in ways, and that in order to respond to it as a healing-centered way, it means you have to actually be engaged in your own healing. You need to be able to say, "Oh, I used to do that."
I know what that
recognize is. I know what that is. I'm not triggered right now. I'm not angry because I know what it is. You can observe it from a place of non-judgment because you know what it is, because you've actually engaged in some healing. And so your observation of the thing that's toxic, the observation of what could be perceived as disrespect, the observation of those things is a function of your own individual and collective healing.
Absolutely.
But we don't, right? And so, but without it, we respond to it, which then creates the toxicity in the environment and the tension and the fighting and all the distrust that erodes whatever it is we're trying to do. I've seen it, and Raquel, I know you've seen it. I've seen it so many times, which is why I'm trying to write about these tools, right? If we had these tools, at least we could say, let's do some mirror work right now. Right? Let's just do some mirror work right now. Let's use another tool. What's possible in this moment? And what's possible if we come together in just ask different questions, because we're using the tools as opposed to reacting to the trauma that we see,
You said something so fantastic in your book. Who do I need to be for others to be free?
Yep.
And wait, say that again. Kind of chopped up.
Who do I need to be for others to be free?
Profound question. Right?
And
profound question.
That's a tool. That is a tool. In any space, you can ask yourself that question. And right there, I think it's like you can move into reflection instantaneously.
Yep. And the other term that my colleague and friend uses is, first wrong question is, what do we do? The first right question is, who do we become?
Right.
It's really saying the same thing. Who do I need to be? Who do I need to become in order for us to actually move into some form of freedom and liberation?
Shawn, that's a fundamental change, though, in terms of how we approach problems in general, right? Because I think we all at times in our home lives and our work lives say, all right, what do we need to do to get through this, whatever this happens to be? I think you're asking us to think back more, holistically at who we are. And that's a fundamental shift for most of us. Speaking for myself.
Yeah, because, one of the things I learned in writing this book is that we can only solve problems at the level of consciousness that we have to solve it.
Yeah.
That's all we have. And
Mhm.
so I believe that we're successfully solving problems without actually evolving and changing as we do so. Now, I'm not talking about just learning. We learn how to solve problems. We get more efficient at it because we solved problems in the past and we've seen this problem before. I'm not talking about learning how to solve problems. What I'm talking about is actually growing as we solve problems and challenges. And that part, right? That part, Barry, which is, one of the lessons in the book is that our current versions of ourselves, like the current version of ourselves, sometimes isn't able to solve the problem in a way that's transformative. So, as an example that Raquel brought up, right, that the old version of myself would solve a problem, someone at me, pointing a finger, with me being louder, right? To me, that's an old version of myself. The new version of myself could say, oh, I used to do that. And it changes it changes how you actually experience the same problem. And so that internal work is the work that I'm calling attention to for people. And it's the harder work, right? It's the harder work to actually take the time to be able to do that. And it doesn't mean, Barry, that we discount the urgency. When COVID happened and the school board said we need to get kids back in school or figure out how to do learning, that's urgent. We got to figure that out, right? You got to do that. It doesn't mean that you take a year to reflect and go to a monastery and, all those things. You got to respond, right? So what I'm suggesting, though, as leaders for justice and transformation, we have to learn how to do both. We have to learn how to dance between both of these.
And something that I think about that dance is when you find yourself in the reflection of, ooh, I was harmful, right? Which for me is a constant of like, I didn't mean to, or then I feel like, you mentioned that grace is the under-deserved permission to be human. And I think the idea of I should allow myself to be human and make mistakes and give myself grace is not something that we also, you're achieving for excellence. You're trying to get it right the first time. Yeah, never mind if somebody, CC'd your boss in 3 emails, to ensure that your mistake is shamed at a higher level. We live in these places where grace isn't something that we center as part of our relational.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and even if we take that to education, educators always think that we have to have all the right answers the very first time, right? Every classroom teacher, no one tells us that, but it's what we believe that we are supposed to do. And so not only do we not give ourselves grace, but then how do we perpetuate that in our classrooms and at our schools and at the district level? It becomes, talk about not having the conditions for the outcomes that we want to have. We expect everybody to be perfect, make no mistakes. And if you do, then you are banished to some other location. And there is no reflection that's going on. So the harm that we perpetuate unintentionally in education, because it's so hard, because there's a culture that exists that says that educators have to have all the answers. And if you're a teacher and you don't have the answer, what's wrong with you? You must not be. How did you get that license? You must have, someone must have done something for you. I mean, the overall culture in the United States around learning is one that that does not support the idea of healing and growing together. I find it the hypocrisy of we are a learning organization, but yet we don't promote learning amongst the adults is quite interesting. And therefore the amount of harm that we do to ourselves, to the people we work with, to the families we serve, and ultimately to the children is, it's very sad.
Yeah, Rachel, the book I talk about, it's a cult, we live and run and operate in the culture of accountability, right?
Mhm.
Accountability for students, accountability for teachers, accountability for staff, right? And you're right, not as much grace. And what I'm encouraging, I write in the sort of last chapter of the book, is cultivating the conditions to dance between both of those.
Right.
Because that's hard. It's really hard to do. It's really easy to do accountability. We know how to do that really well. And it's really easy to always operate in grace. But it's hard to dance between the two. When do I lean into grace and when should I lean into accountability? When should I pivot from accountability into grace and then back to accountability? What does accountability mean in this situation? And what might grace look like? How do I actually hold myself? What does grace look like for me when I actually am not showing up the best? All of these things, right? I think is a function of us trying to be more human with one another. To figure out how we actually can create the conditions for our humanity to deeply transform the systems that we find ourselves in.
John, and to the panelists, I want to point out that we're getting to about 15 minutes left in the program, and we do have a few questions that have come in. If I can kind of try to at least get to a couple of those before we have to break this afternoon. The first question that came in, I love the exercises included in the text. So important to the practicing of pivoting. What resources might be available to support an organization or a large community book study that requires doing the work alongside others?
Well, two responses to that question. One, we're building actually a toolkit for folks, and so that will be out hopefully this fall, where people can kind of download activities and go online and sort of engage in sort of community learning around the 4 pivots. So that's actually being built out as I speak. But in the meantime, a really good opportunity is what I've said in the book, which is, find 5 to 6 people who are actually engaging in the book, who are reading the book, and use that as an opportunity to ask questions, not about what you read in the book, but how it landed for you. What was the hardest pivot and why? Why is that so hard for you? To lean into some of those questions and have some discussion. And I think what you'll find is that in these sort of small group discussions, you'll begin to have different insights about your own leadership and ways that you could actually move and think differently about your systems. And so this is not, again, here's what you do, right? We will have some tools for folks in the fall, but right now, without this toolkit, the book tries to point to some questions or some activities that can actually move a small group forward in thinking about how to implement the pivots in their work.
And I'll just, perfect opportunity to do a plug. Worcester Public Schools will be launching a book study for anyone with, in collaboration with WEC and Worcester State to, in the fall. So we'll be looking forward to that toolkit, but we definitely are wanting to create a collaborative space where we work through this together and work towards a healing learning environment, not just in Worcester Public Schools, in the community of Worcester and all of those who call this our home.
Let me grab one more question, if I may. We have been robbed of the healing power of reimagining because we have had to work so hard. We have been immersed in problem solving. Reimagining usually doesn't start spontaneously. What are helpful ways to learn the beautiful art of reimagining and dreaming?
Great question. I'm always so focused on language and terms we use, and I would revise your statement to say you haven't been robbed of the power of healing and reimagining. It's always been there. You haven't been given permission or space to lean into it, right? It hasn't been taken away. You still got it, right? And so that is perhaps one of the most profound human qualities that we have, right? My ancestors who were African, who were brought over on slave ships, they were not robbed of their imagination for freedom. They still had the imagination to be free. If they didn't dream of freedom for their children and their grandchildren, I wouldn't be sitting here. If they would have not dreamed and imagined, they would have wanted an easier form of enslavement. And that's not what it was. They wanted, it was freedom. And so this condition, our capacity to dream and imagine another way, is innately human, right? And so I think your question is, how do you do that, right? I think the question, if that is your question, I turn it back to you and ask, what are the spaces that you actually engage in imagining? Not for your work, not even for your community, because it's hard to do that. I want to point it to you.
Mhm.
What do you dream your life to be? What do you imagine for your children and you? What do you it starts with our building that muscle for us. And so when you do that, then you're able to then cultivate the capacity to use that same dreaming and imagination for our work and for the communities we care about.
I think we have time for one more question, Jen. I think she's nodding. Yep, thumbs up. Okay. All right. So let me jump at one here. Powerful messages and pivots we need to make. How do we continue to do the work and refill, recharge, and to keep going? Sometimes the work can be draining as we connect, learn, empathize, and then turn towards a vision for the future.
Yeah. The last unit, or the fourth pivot, right? The pivot from hustle to flow. Everyone on this call has probably been on some type of diet, right? Diet to lose weight, diet to gain weight, diet to get more muscle, diet to run faster, right? How many of you have been on a flow diet? That is something that you do every day to facilitate flow in your life. What is flow? Flow is a disconnection from frenzy, from always having to do the next 10 minutes a day, right? That actually facilitates the practice of flow. And flow means that I can actually experience and practice and engage without hindrance, right? It means that I'm not bound, and there's all the science of flow that I don't have to get into, that I want to get into right now. But I would encourage folks to start your own flow diet. Flow diet could be, I'm going to take a 5-minute walk during lunch. I am actually going to light a candle tonight before I go to bed and just reflect. I'm going to, hug my kids for just a little bit longer today before they go off to school.
Gratitude journal.
Gratitude journal.
Raquel?
I was just saying gratitude journal while you froze.
Gratitude journal, right? Whatever it is, have some intentionality and assuring that there's some flow in your life on a regular basis.
I would also like to add that, or re-emphasize the importance of it has to start with you. I feel like we hear that all the time, but you can't sustain anyone else's stuff until your foundation is nice and strong. And there's no such thing as you're done with your foundation. It's like a constant ongoing effort of participating in things that remind you that you matter and remind you that you have value, because until you're sustaining that and watering that and nurturing that as a practice, it's not possible to then expand that out anywhere. You can try, but I'm going to tell you it's not going to work and it's not going to be sustainable. And so it has to really be a commitment to yourself.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Shawn, I'm going to give the last 5 minutes back to Jennifer. But before I do, let me, on behalf of all of us who are gathered here today, I want to thank you. I want to thank the other panelists for your time. Folks, if you have not read this wonderful piece, please take a moment to do so. When Jennifer poked me to be part of today's program, I said, oh, good, reading right before commencement, right before year end. I love Jen and she does great work. And so I took on the challenge. And I'm glad that I did. It was really, you should, Shawn, you should be very proud. It's a wonderful piece. And I think will be a good template for us going forward here in the community in terms of aligning our thoughts, in terms of how we continue to look at changing our schools, our community organizations, our universities and colleges, our community as a whole. And so thank you for the gift that you've provided today. And Jen, I hope that I've carried out the facilitator's role, at least in a pedestrian way, but I'm going to turn it back to you and thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's program.
Great. Thank you, Barry, and thank you for being the facilitator today. And thank you, Rachel and Raquel, for contributing to this conversation and adding your thoughts on how we operationalize, how we make this happen. And Shawn, I'd like to thank you for challenging our thinking and helping us to think in a transformative way, looking through new lenses. At how we do our work, whether it's in education or other areas involved in social change. We consider our work here in Worcester as part of an ecosystem. And this is something that as our ecosystem continues to evolve, this is an approach that we all need to think about and incorporate into our work. So thank you for being here and welcome to Massachusetts. So I do want to talk a little bit about something that Rachel mentioned, and that is the book study that the Worcester Public Schools will be hosting beginning in the fall. It will be a tremendous opportunity for us to really probe deeply the ideas in the book and think about their applicability, not just to the work that we do, but to our lives, and how this work is not just something we do, but how this is a part of our lives and a part of our approach to being in this community together. So thank you. Shawn, any last words for us before we adjourn?
Just thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully I'll be able to drop in Worcester next time I'm back in Boston, and hopefully see how the book club's going.
Great, thank you so much.
Take care.
And congratulations to the North High graduates this evening. So great. All right, thank you, everyone, and we are adjourned, as they say.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.